Shalini Randeria could maybe intervene also.
Well, maybe what I'll do is just be very, very brief and come back to the question which you asked me when you said, what kinds of entanglements are these? Are we all entangled in a Western web? And my very quick answer to you then was to say, let's look at it as an empirical question, and let's look at modernity as a claim-making concept. My second answer would have been, but that was not given for lack of time, so I'll just make that one point, and that's all for the moment, which is to say, I think one could make a very different argument on this, and the argument would be to say that the West itself is a product of this entanglement. That I think it is a mistake to pose the entire question in terms of multiplicities, such as if there were a West and a Western modernity, totally independent of these historical exchanges, however asymmetrical they may have been. And then to pose that question in terms of which elements of this configuration have diffused in the process of globalization throughout other regions of the world. I think it would make much more sense to take a relational perspective on it and see the West itself as a product of these historical and contemporary entanglements. I won't go as far as to say something that Frantz Fanon wrote in The Wretched of the Earth when he said, Europe is literally the creation of the Third World. That's, I think, taking the argument too far. But what I do want to point out, too, is that there is, for me, there are two reasons to make this relational argument. One is that I think there is a mistaken view that modern Europe consisted of nation states. I think modern Europe consisted, till very close to the Second World War, in a large part of empire states. And I think we forget that in 1945, when at the end of the Second World War, the population of France, 110 million, a majority lived outside the borders of France. And it's actually, according to this, and I want to really take this point really far when I say it's in 1962 when France left Algeria that France became a nation state. Until then, France was an empire state. And I think we have a world of empire states which we are not looking at seriously enough, and therefore my plea for bringing imperialism back into the study of modernity, seeing imperialism and colonialism as constitutive of modernity and as not something which was outside of Western modernity. And the second reason why I say this is that I think that there is sort of a risk of there is sort of modernization theory gives us this idea of the embrace of European universalism, something which Jeffrey Alexander talked about. It's this risk of being embraced in a European brotherhood. The reaction to this in a lot of the non-Western world has been to turn ourselves into islands of otherhood. And I think it's very important somehow to get to find a way to navigate between these two reflexes of the embrace of European universalism, to navigate between that on the one hand, but not fall into the trap of turning ourselves into islands of particular otherhoods.
Your point is extremely well taken. I feel that your web is being woven by the very meetings, the interactions between the Western and the other cultures. And while I was listening to you, I was asking myself the following question: what would there have been Mahatma Gandhi if he hadn't been exposed to South African society?
There would have been a Mahatma Gandhi. He would have been a different Mahatma Gandhi.
Very different.
Very different Mahatma Gandhi. But not only South Africa, you would have had a very different Gandhi if he had not been exposed to Ruskin and to Tolstoy.
You're right.
I think you actually provided also a partial answer to the last question posed by Fredrik Barth in the previous session. A partial answer, a very important one.